where I tell you a little bit about my journey. It's funny, I found about, I would say 5 years ago or so, people approaching me as a mentor or saying, you know, I think I'm interested in you being a mentor. And I sort of had never oddly thought of myself that way. You think that I might, but it didn't occur to me. And then what I found was that people were interested in the details of how you get somewhere, like, and not the sort of like, well, I took a course in ABC, but kind of more the stuff that nobody ever tells you, right? The nitty gritty stuff that you just, you know, unless you're over cocktails with someone 30 years later, you don't learn that everybody had that experience or something. So, so the details, the odd details, those are the things that I'm doing presentations. And I'm going to talk for maybe 15, 20 minutes. I'm a big chatter, so it might be, you know, a little more than that. And then I'm really good at answering questions. I'm just going to note that I do see a little bit of people who may not have muted themselves and getting a little back stuff. So if you are not on mute, you could just please do that for yourself. That would be great. I also have the power to mute people, so or call people out. Oops, so I want, okay. So and I wrote a book on managing software projects. So it's kind of funny looking back all of these years, but because you know, you're a CEO and you're you know, people see me as someone who is an early stage web developer, and I was, but true, and people see me as kind of like, oh, you're a natural CEO. Like, of course you started out on this path, and that is totally not how I started out at all. I'm the CEO of my own company for 26 years. I've worked for some of the biggest names in the business: Kellogg, Harvard Business Publishing, the Washington Post, Johnson and Johnson, you know, just Unilever, big names all around the world. And I started my company by accident. And it's the story involves being unprepared, being young, all the things that happen, and sexual harassment as well. So I'm just gonna put it all in the soup so you guys can get a sense of like, this is how the soup sort of happens. So I'm a New Yorker. I live in New York. I'm fourth generation New York City. My great grandfather lived in Brooklyn. And so of course that's where I went after I got out of college. And I was an English major, and I really wanted to do something having to do with media and communications. So I got a master's degree from Columbia Journalism. And back then, and I graduated that program in 1991. And back then, a journalism degree was a technical degree. It was one of the techiest degrees that a non-engineer could get. And you'll recall that, like, my contemporaries who were computer scientists, like, Java wasn't a thing yet, guys. I mean, it was Fortran, right? So, which was very back officey, very machiney, you know, this kind of thing. So I was interested in media and communications. I got a journalism degree, and we were doing early editing on computers. It was the years where audio editing was going to these large consoles, where you would, and they would take up like the whole side of a room, because you know, it was very technical. You were composing and editing on screen, which was kind of unusual for that time. And so I got this great degree in journalism and was kind of at the forefront of, you know, what would have been a career in media. And then I met a guy, and I moved to Michigan. So that was great. My fallback whenever I was unemployed, like between college and graduate school and stuff, I was a teacher. So there were no media conglomerates in Michigan. So I fell back on teaching. You know, I was going to get married, which I did, and fall in love with this guy, which I did. And after a couple of years of teaching, I'm in my mid-20s at this point, and I thought to myself, well, I got to get my career back on track. And one option would have been to move back to New York and split up and pursue my career, and I wasn't quite there yet. But at the time, and we're talking about like 1994, 95, CD-ROMs were what were on the cover of Time magazine, right? These multimedia games. And the company that I looked up companies, and there was indeed a small company in Michigan that had a major competitor, not to Carmen they didn't have Carmen Sandiego, but they had the #1 game competing with Carmen Sandiego. And I thought, Eureka, this is a place where I'm well qualified to work, because it was multimedia. I had training in that. And so I went and I managed the software division at that company. And they put out kids games, kids educational games. And now we're at like 1995, 96. The web was certainly around. And if you were around computer programmers, which I were, they were talking about the web. And the management of the company, the programmers were like, we need to do something in this, shift our offerings, whatever. And the management of that company was like, yeah, this internet thing, we really don't think it's going anywhere. So no. So the vice president of that company, I was having some personnel challenges with, because he was taking me on business trips and coming on to me, and he was married to the daughter of the man that owned the company. And I had learned fast and early that in those kinds of situations, there's one loser, and it ain't him. So they were not pursuing the internet. The programming staff was disgruntled. I had a problem with the boss, and so I jumped and took some programmers with me, which is the kind of thing you do at 25. Like, oh, how complicated can this be? Now, truly, at the time, the web wasn't all that complicated. Why can't I advance the slide? So I had a potential client with the old company, with the Harassy guy, and people were interested in creating games. So CD-ROMs, right? Cover of Time magazine, Carmen Sandiego. And brands were interested. We were working with a couple of brands, cultivating some ideas, like you could make a branded game that you would distribute for free or as a prize or whatever, as an advertiser, and they could play your interactive game. It's just the way bobbleheads, like they were a popular toy, and then every brand wanted a bobblehead. It's the same kind of thing. So I was in conversation with the executives at Keebler. And honest to God, I went into this guy's office one day. I had started out on my own, and he goes, this web thing. That morning, Keebler had been on the cover of the Wall Street Journal as the largest branded company at the time who had no website. So, Nabisco had one, and Lord only knows who else, that the Wall Street Journal. I had no idea. I wasn't following the Wall Street Journal. I was just going to see my customer in Chicago. And everybody was coming down on him, the board, everybody, and he goes, Anna, because we had built it like a little game, like the one you see over here. It's clearly running in a frame. This is what it all looked like, this tiny little window. And he said, he was in despair because they're a big ad agency, which at the time was Leo Burnett, big name. He had like some piece of paper in front of him. He goes, I just can't believe what it costs to build a website. And I wasn't in the web business at that time. We were doing multimedia games still, and trying to break into the web business, because that's what the programmers that I had taken with me wanted to do. And he goes, can you build a website? And I said, sure, thinking, I don't know. And he said, well, how much will it cost me? And I said, well, I'll charge you a third of what that guy said if you show me the bid, which, I mean, he did. And I said, done deal. And then I went back to the lead guy, who was my business partner. I said, you need to build a website for this amount of money. And this is what it looked like in 1997. So that is a story of how legitimately my company launched and got to be a real company because, you know, they say opportunity is the intersection of luck and preparedness. And I actually have a gripe with we'll talk a lot about the bros in Silicon Valley in a minute. And I got a lot of gripes about a lot of things. So in that world, so I could go on forever. But one of my biggest gripes is that people don't credit luck, how much of a component luck plays in the picture. I listen to people who are bajillionaires and they talk about how hard they work. And I'm not saying they don't work hard, but the woman who cleans the office building that I work in works hard, and she's not a billionaire. So this equation of I worked hard or I deserve it is something that I really dislike. So I always like to remind people that, yeah, sure, I worked hard and I took risks, and starting a company is not easy. And there was a lot of stuff that I had to learn that I had no idea that I had to learn. I'd never even taken an accounting course, never mind run a company and figure out what payroll meant and how you did it, or, all of this new stuff. Journalism degree helps because you're always learning new stuff. Go report on that nuclear reactor. I don't know anything about nuclear reactors. Right, you're a journalist. That's your job. Go learn. So that helped, but also I was lucky. I had some lucky partners along the way, and it wasn't all just because I, worked hard and was brilliant. So it was kind of tough being an early stage web company founder, because you guys will recall that I did not come up through the engineering track. I was an English major, and I knew that there was sexism in journalism, but I literally had it's not like I had spent 4 years, never mind getting my master's or PhD in a computer science department where I know what it meant. I hadn't any idea. I thought, well, how would I know? Maybe every single founder of a web company is a woman. I'm literally just out here in Michigan doing it. And it took probably about, I would say about a good 6, 8, 10 years for me to fully appreciate that I was unusual, that there were not a lot of female founders, because it wasn't really in my interest to kind of look up and say, societally speaking, from a societal perspective, where do I fit? And, I was just like, I got to make payroll. I got to get clients. I got to figure out, the web was getting more complicated. I was very, very lucky that I got on the job training. I came into the web at its infancy, and therefore I could onboard the knowledge as the years went by, where the web would connect to a database, and then the web just became software, addressable software. But what I didn't realize, and I think why there's a bunch of young women who eventually gravitated to me, is that gender in computer science had a very, very long history. And part of that history is well documented in this great book, Brotopia by Emily Chang, which is a sort of a social history of Silicon Valley. And one of the things that Emily Chang and others bring up is that, we've all heard, Grace Hopper, or I hope we've heard Grace Hopper, first computer scientist. But the other thing that's very interesting is because computers were kind of office machines and the punch cards and all of that. So it was handed over to the typing pool. So women were actually some of the first operators of the computers, because it was like, okay, you can type. This is sort of like that sort of thing, and we don't do that. So off you go. And when computers made a shift to being more essential for business and more essential for profit making, that's when, when jobs become higher earning, when jobs become lower earning, there's a gender and racial switch that takes place. And you can, the test case or the example case, I should say, that people talk about in that realm is of the bank teller. Now, I know that I'm talking to a generation of people who have not had much experience with bank tellers. But way back in prehistory, there was a person who stood at the bank who cashed your check or took your check on deposit. And you didn't have an ATM machine and you didn't have online, you went to a bank. And before my time, it was probably switching when I was a kid. Bank tellers were men. You went up to a bank window, like imagine like Gringotts at Harry Potter. You went up to a bank window and there was a guy there, and it was a guy, and he took your deposit. And then when that got more automated with early computers and systems that would vacuum tubes that would take checks hither and yon, it became more automated. The profession became lower paid, and then women became bank tellers. So and the opposite is true as well. And that's what happened in computer science. At first, it was this very secretarial administrative job. And then when it became more complex and you needed a professional degree to do it, women stopped being the main people who were doing it, which they were in the 60s and 70s, and it switched to become a male profession. And there are dozens of instances, but the bank teller is, in the computer science example, are inverses of one another. So this was all happening, the web is coming on. And this is a fun story. Emily Chang covers it in Brotopia. This is sort of this example is, this is an example of the embedded sexism that was happening in early computer science, which is somebody had to develop the compressed file we all know as the JPEG, right? When I was programming for the web and I was doing early web pages, I was typing the early web pages via GIFs and via JPEGs. JPEG compression format. The test case that the early developers of the JPEG used, they needed an image that had a lot of different things in it. Background, foreground, skin, light, dark, and texture. So they were looking for pictures that would meet these criteria to use as test cases. And guess what? The picture that they chose was from I forget which Scandinavian country, but from a Scandinavian country's Playboy style magazine. This is Lena, who was a centerfold, and all of the developers of the JPEG, this gal was she was like a poster in cubicles or whatever the equivalent of that was in 73, because she was the test case for the JPEG. And up until really recently, probably like 5-10 years ago, nobody even brought this up. I mean, she was in textbooks and stuff, like nobody ever pointed out, like, maybe back then that was inappropriate. There's a level of perhaps inappropriate, because obviously I am not showing you the whole picture of Lena, the JPEG, the test case for development of compression and compressed images. Okay, so Lena, the JPEG, read Brotopia. The other phenomenon that we know to be true and is being documented more and more is the fact that when women do things that up until a certain time in history, again, very recent, when women have been notable for doing things, they don't get documented. So a good example of trying to right the wrong of this is the Times I actually think this is so, it's almost like a delicious irony of this, because it's the obituary section, right? Like, we're so behind on this, we got to go back to dead women. to finally catch up with the live women. And just this week in the New York Times, there was, a woman artist who was a 19th century woman artist. So it is a fact that, women who have done major things, who have had major discoveries, they just don't get published. So not great. And again, I mean, I'm from a generation where, I was born in 1966. So my teachers were baby boomers, and the baby boomers were super hopeful people. They were teaching us that women can do everything and that sexism has been canceled, and that, so, we entering the workplace had a cold bath of reality, because we were told like things have changed, it's the age of Aquarius. And I think that there's so much work to do. And again, I think the Times section of women who are overlooked, and just like, look at this, like, they're 1920s garb, like they're just got to go back. So diverse teams. No, there was something I forgot to tell you about history of computer science and women. It'll come to me. Okay. So this is getting to be an old saw among boards. Boards are consciously recruiting women to be on boards of public companies. And the reason is that when women are which is not these two examples, I'll get into this in a minute, but when women are on the board of a public company, and they've tracked the data over many years, the public company does better. And when the public company has more diversity on its board, the public company does better. So just a couple, I think, really salient examples. This one is the survey of boards that I was talking to you about, that if you have at least one female board member, you're yielding a higher return. That's a data point. And a survey of 2,400 companies ain't nothing. That's a lot of companies. And then just in a kind of a more real life level, there's this sort of mock trial where they impaneled 6-person juries, and some were diverse and some were not diverse. And the fundamental conclusion was that the panels that were more diverse were more just and were more error-free. So why is that so? I think that people are still trying to figure that out. But for sure, there's less, I guess you would call it confirmation bias. Like, we've all done this, I don't know, in a kind of snarky, gossipy way. Like somebody says something maybe a little negative about a person, and you go, oh gosh, thank God they said that. I didn't want to say that snarky thing. Like, that's a kind of confirmation bias. And if that's reinforcing itself and no one challenges that, like, I don't know, why would you say you didn't like her shoes? I think they're perfectly fine, right? Voice from outside. If nobody does that, then everybody says, off with you, you're wearing the wrong color shoes. So you could see in a very simple way why diversity is better, although it is certainly not as comfortable. I think a lot of us would rather sit around with people who confirm our points of view. And I guess that's what Friday night beers are for. But so inside of companies, and I'm talking about women specifically because obviously that was my journey. There is one part of the funnel that this group is very in touch with, which is getting people into the career of computer science or STEM careers. And that has been a challenge. There's actually been some backsliding. There are fewer women graduating as computer scientists now in 2022 than when I was in college in the 80s. So that's not good. So we have been able to attract, in the past, to attract people into STEM careers, and then we kind of do the opposite of that. And then when we get people into the funnel, the actual, I'm checking the time, guys. I will stop talking pretty soon. When we get people into the funnel and we get them through the programs, which can be difficult. I mean, the attrition stories that I heard when I was in college was like, it's kind of tough to be the only woman in an engineering class of 40. That can't be fun. Or the only person of color, I'm sure, the only gay person. None of this is fun, So when women are in corporations, so we did better at attracting women to engineering professions. Then we started to do worse. Now it's ticking up a little bit. So that's good. Because we want women in companies and in those jobs. And there's this have to see it to be it factor. Like maybe you wouldn't consider a career as a CEO or web founder because all you see is Elon Musk or whatever you see. And then, so there's me. Like I'm a different cup of tea. I'm not everybody's cup of tea, but I'm a different cup of tea. But once people get into jobs, there's still a lot of reasons why women leave the track of the job. The Brotopia book brings up the hot tub factor, which is literally like some stupid Silicon Valley company where the CEO would have these hot tub parties that were naked, by the way. And I don't know how many women who like to go bathing suit shopping, but naked hot tub parties at CEO's house are like not on the top of the. I mean, I don't know why guys would want to be naked with their, but I don't. Who knows? But anyway, actual practices that kept women from being in those, back in the day, we would have said, golf club conversations when the golf club only admitted men, right? And we have a whole bunch of things, whether it's, I've heard a lot of permutations of this, sort of gambling trips to Las Vegas, sponsored by the company for bonding, or paintball trips to wherever, or, just things that, I guess you could see them. You could challenge the fact that they're gendered, but the fact that women are reporting like, I was turned off by that company and I felt that I couldn't get in the inner circle because I didn't want to be naked in a hot tub or go paintball thingy, right? That they're just like, I can't do it. It's not for me. Discouragement and unequal treatment, code reviews. There's a lot of data that say women's code inside of companies that have a good code review practice are, have a 35% greater chance of being rejected on code review than male. And this isn't, double blind, studies. They give the code and then they don't say the name, and then they give the name, which is an identifiably female name or male name, and the results change. And then here's here's a couple of other things to keep in mind. I actually did this in a job where you're inside a company, let's just say it's Meta or Twitter or Google or some really, really great famous company that you did want to be part of because it's famous and important. But you see all these things, these hot tub parties, you're getting hit in the head with a paintball or whatever. And somebody makes you another offer, right? You're talented, you've got, and it could be working, in more of an administrative capacity at a pharmaceutical company. So maybe you aren't inventing the next Mars rover, software for the next Mars rover or SpaceX, but you're using your skills, you're appreciated, and you're not facing all of this stuff. So people do that. Like, I mean, I remember leaving a job and they're trying to convince me to stay at a job, and it's a terrible sexist environment. And I was like, I honestly, when it comes right down to it, I don't want to spend oh, Anna, you could make such a difference. Will you be an example of change? And we promise. And it's like, but it's not my life journey to spend all of this energy and suffering to change you. Like, why am I going to do that? What do I get out of that? gray hair. So it really is, it's an over under kind of assessment. So this final bullet point should not be on the slide, because the slide is like why women leave. This is sort of why women don't get in to begin with, and why qualified people don't get in to begin with. Job descriptions are way too restrictive. Like, you need 5 years of this and that to do thus and such. And because AI is now involved in sorting through these resumes, someone who could, I mean, for example, I always say, like, a good project manager could project manage anything. They could project manage Barnum and Bailey's circus if they had to. So, 4 years of engineering to do this particular project management task, I don't. So I think, to the extent that you can get referrals to get jobs, encouraging people to think beyond this sort of set of qualifications that they've decided somehow is important. First of all, increases the ability for gender diversity, right? Because you're not because we know that women are entering computer science in lesser numbers. All right, so are we on to, okay, I think this is the fun stuff. Yeah, all right. Part of the reason I wrote the book that's over there and was on the first slide is because I was the interim CIO of a media company, and the two lead PMs reporting to me happened to be young women, which was the first time in my life that had happened. And I would come up with all of these little sayings, and one of them said, have you written that down anywhere? And I said, oh, that's good. So thinking about this group, I thought that I would pull out what I think are the most important for career development, because you're either in school or about to be in college or about to be thinking about a job. And these were the things that really were hard fought lessons that nobody told me. The first one came after a bunch of job searching I had done, and my dad told me this one. So this one did come early on, which is get the job, then turn it down. What that means, so I have talked to so many people on my staff, people that I'm mentoring, and they're like so out, and my dad was a skier, so far out in front of their skis, right? Like, they're already, I don't know, I mean, if I got that job, I'd work for this boss, and they're saying that so they're just so far down the line. I don't know that I'd like the culture, and they're saying it would be a long commute, and like, nobody has offered you this job, by the way. And there is no disadvantage for getting a job offer. But people go into job interviews and they all say, you should interview the person that could be your boss, interview them. But what they don't say is, as you're interviewing them, don't piss them off, right? Don't act like you're too good for their whatever it is. You also want to communicate that you would love this job more than anything in the world. Ask them questions, because there is no disadvantage to you to getting a job offer and turning it down. But there is a disadvantage for sending out a signal that you're not interested in the job, because internally that's what you're feeling. Oh, wow, I would have to sit over there, because a lot can change in the negotiation. They give you the job. Suddenly you're talking to someone different from the person that you were talking to before. And you say, the job description said that this was on site. And to be honest with you, it's an hour-and-a-half commute. And that, I know, thank you for offering. I really thought I could do it, but on further consideration, great phrase, on further consideration, right? Now they've invested time in you. Well, and now you could be their top candidate. And the person there who's going to head the department is like, you got to get this Victor on this job. So they go back and say, would you consider hybrid? That is, get the job first, then turn it down. The next one I probably learned 10 years into running my own company. When I started running my own company, I wanted important clients. I wanted clients that had a marquee name And then I would go to a party and people would say, oh, you work for so-and-so? That was important. Then I learned that they were all mean and they don't pay their bills because everybody wants to work for them. And there's a line out the door. And I can walk away and I can not get paid and have a terrible experience, and there's still going to be a line out the door of people who want to work with them. So I learned that what I needed to do was not focus on important clients that would make me sound really good at a cocktail party, but clients, and I'm going to skip one and jump to the fourth one. Clients who had the qualities that I wanted, right? And that's in the client world. And when it comes to a boss, when it comes to jobs, the person you work for is so important. To the extent that when I was having a conversation with someone else who'd learned this lesson, they said, yeah, it doesn't matter if you're making widgets as long as you have a good boss. Like a good boss will teach you everything, will accommodate you, it is just the most precious thing in the world to work for a good boss. So for many things in life, I'm skipping to the fourth one and we'll get back to like attracts like. For many things in life, especially in the past, people have spent a lot of time having a career plan. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that and then I'm going to do the other, because in their mind, it's a straight, maybe, like this, but there's a ladder from getting to point A to point B. The problem with career plans, it works in a couple of industries still, like law, like you got to go to law school and then you got to be an associate and then you get, so some ladders are very clear still. Doctor, I got to go to med school, I got to do a residency. But most careers are no longer a path. And if you make a plan, you have now put on blinkers to everything outside of that plan. So there's a whole, there are entire careers that you might not know exist that could be open to you. There's a weird career I ran into the other day, and I'll think of it in a minute, but it was just like, I didn't even know such a job existed. So whether it comes to a boss or frankly a partner or a career, it is much better to say something like, well, let me give you what you wouldn't want to say. Sorry, my dog is getting at my cough drop. I want a career as a vice president of marketing. Now I know I'm talking to computer science, but well, that's pretty specific. That's like more on the plan side of things than on the attribute side of things. So, but if you pick that apart, if you ask a person, well, why do you want a job as a vice president of marketing? They would say, well, marketing is it's very creative, and, I would be doing creative things, and it feels like it would be changing all the time because I would be marketing one product and another. Okay, now we have attributes. You don't want to be vice president of marketing. You want a creative career that's constantly changing, where you're not bored but doing the same thing all the time. That could be a lot of things. Honestly, maybe vice president of marketing isn't that. I'm sure there are a lot of VPs of marketing who don't feel that that's their job all along. Or I want to be, back in, in the day, I want to be a doctor. Why? Doctors make a lot of money. Oh, so you don't want to be a doctor. You want to make a lot of money, which, by the way, is a wonder. I want to be well compensated. Great. Who wouldn't want to be well compensated? This is a perfectly legitimate goal. But you see, you've made up a rule that in order to do that, you have to be a doctor. So the best way to manage your career and career development is to get to the qualities or attributes that you're after in your career. Flexibility, good compensation, creativity, all of these things qualify as attributes rather than I want to be head of IT systems in Florida. Why? Well, I like the warm weather and I want the dignity of a big title. Okay, again, attributes, warm weather, dignity of title. So let's go back to like attracts like. This rule is one of the most important ones to live by in business. When you walk into a company and you meet, especially people in leadership, there's always a honeymoon period, by the way. So you can't actually get at this for a little while. They will have certain qualities that are good, like most people, and they will have certain qualities that are negative. And in organizations, everyone generally shares the negative qualities of leadership. Have their own good qualities, but they share the negative qualities. So if the leader is a yeller, or a nitpicker, or a micromanager, if the leader or leaders of a company say the sky is orange, everybody in that company will say the sky is orange. So on consulting gigs, when I go in and I'm asked to sort of diagnose a company because they just spent $50 million on an IT thing that went sideways, which happens. Actually, I can talk to anyone up and down the food chain. Because if I talk to someone here and they're rigid and rule bound and lacking in creative thought and just sort of like, I don't know, there's kind of, sometimes you have like a product obsession, like, well, we have to do Microsoft, right? Because, okay, you will find that all the way up and vice versa. So like attracts like. Don't think that if you convince your immediate boss, who seems like a nice person, if this person up on top of him is not bending, the whole thing is not bending. Forget it. Go new job, right? And then this final one, which is, gosh, it is more important that I must say this. I certainly say it every year. So there's a little story behind this, and I'm taking way much more time than I said, but I'm going to do this quickly. So I went to an all-girls Catholic school in high school, and we had a very strict science teacher. She taught us organic and inorganic chemistry, and she never got off topic. She was so strict, you couldn't talk, you couldn't pass a note, you couldn't whisper, you couldn't blink, you couldn't anything. She was young and pretty and just so strict. She had us all like this. So at the end of our senior year, she never did that thing that teachers do, is like, let's just have a chat and be personal. Never. We didn't know her middle name. So she let us, at the end of our senior year, all sitting there intimidated by her, ask her any question we wanted to ask. And somebody said, what's your best advice going off to college? We're all going off to college. She wasn't a lot older than us, maybe 7 years older than us. And we expected advice coming at us about boys or sex or parties or who knows. And she said, my best advice is don't fight with your roommates before Thanksgiving. And then she went on to explain that there are stretches in life, and in school, it's the stretch between Labor Day and Thanksgiving, where you are on a sprint. You've just come back and you're on a sprint, and the first break is Thanksgiving. And she was an RA, which is why she knew this. And right before Thanksgiving, more roommates have meltdowns than any other time of the year, because everybody is on their final nerve fiber. And you have this huge meltdown that if you just decided you were going to go home and eat some turkey and come back on Monday, it would all seem very minor. So this one is, don't fight with your roommates before Thanksgiving. When the team, and it happens a lot in IT, the reason that it's so useful is it happens a lot in IT, you're on a big sprint, you're about to launch. Suddenly, someone gets on your last nerve fiber and you decide to torpedo the whole project because you just can't take it anymore. So remember, don't fight with your roommates before Thanksgiving. Since a lot of you are in college right now, just don't fight with your roommates before Thanksgiving, like straight up. All right.
All right, great. Anna, thank you so much. So we have about 10 minutes or so. So I'm going to open it up for questions, if that's okay, Anna. So to our audience, if you have specific questions, please use the reactions icon at the bottom of the screen, raise your hand. And when I call on you, feel free to unmute yourselves and ask a question. Okay, so I see a hand go up. Colin, what's your question?
Hi, I just had a question concerning whether or not you think it's a good idea to try and negotiate on an offer for your first job out of college.
That is a tough one. I guess I guess it would depend on the circumstances, but I think why not? I mean, you can say, and I would go about it. Make sure you practiced saying it in a very neutral way, and say I was hoping for X, and see what they respond. Because I don't think that there's any harm to it. But I would be very careful to check your language with someone else, so it just sounds neutral to the point of casual. You know, you can build up and you're like, I don't know, I was hoping for X, and suddenly it's like supercharged. But as long as you're matter of fact about it, I don't see why not. They just say no, there's no disadvantage.
Okay, thank you.
Tony.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So yeah, I have a question in regards to the statement you made about luck and opportunity. Maybe I didn't hear exactly. So you think that luck trumps like what you learn and your opportunities then? But like more like you got to be in the right place at the right time.
I think it can be in different proportions depending on the situation. So I think that there are, I think the best combo is luck and skill. Luck, skill, and hard work, right? I just have an objection to people who do not credit good fortune, being given a chance, any kind of thing that you know qualifies in that. Like, no one had to do that for you. Usually there's something like that in somebody's story. There was like something like that in mine. I mean, it's the rare person who had to overcome every obstacle and sort of chisel through rock in an unabated way and never being given any luck or opportunity. That you don't hear so often, but you do hear people who take all the credit for where they've gotten and don't thank the people whose shoulders they stood on or where they just had straight up luck. Healthy humility.
Okay, any other questions? Lisa?
Hi, my question is just pertaining to mobile marketing. So how were you able to introduce or expand your company's brand?
Oh, wow, that's a tough one. We always say, I set intentions like we were doing website development and we were like, mobile apps, everybody was doing mobile apps. And you know, I don't know how it happens. I honestly, I don't even know how, sometimes I don't know how sales happen. You know, I'm the main salesperson. I bring in the sales, so you'd think I would know how it happens. But I definitely remember a point in time setting a distinct intention saying, I would really like to get involved in a mobile app development. And then an opportunity came along. Usually that's all it takes is, you know, put the intention out there and then keep your eyes peeled. Oh, and here's a good piece of advice.
Thank you.
Don't force it. I'm kind of I guess woo-woo when it comes to sales and timing. If you feel like you're forcing it, you're pushing it, you got to stop. The timing's wrong, right? So like when you send out a resume and you don't hear back for 2 weeks, like that, those 2 weeks could feel like a nanosecond in the time, but regardless, it's fine to remind or whatever. But when you feel like you're pushing something against resistance, stop. The timing's wrong.
Okay, Emma.
So for like job interviews and everything, they always say like don't oversell yourself, but don't undersell yourself. What would you say is like the good medium for that?
Wow, that's a tough one too. I think you have to read your audience, right? One of the things that benefits a person quite well in a career in career and interviews is to be able to read what you're getting from that other person. And sometimes people say even mirror their body language. So if they're sitting forward, you sit forward. If they're chatty, you're chatty. I will say as a general rule, women undersell themselves. It's our go-to. And I think we get beaten up a lot but on that score. Oh, women undersell themselves. Well, I'm here to tell you from being in business for almost 3 decades that when you sell yourself, the way you see Silicon Valley guys do all the time, when you sell yourself, like, I'm terrific and I'm the best thing since sliced bread. You are not, you are greeted with a negative attitude. People are not used to women, especially young women, saying they're the best things since sliced bread. Another tip, it doesn't matter if your interviewer is a woman. Women are just as sexist as men, and study after study proves that. So, for example, if you're looking at resumes, they've done, these double-blind studies, and the resume has a name that's either no name or completely gender neutral. And the same qualifications, and women and men will rate it the same. If they change the name to be a gendered name, both women and men will discriminate against the female candidate in equal numbers. So do not assume that since you're talking to women may be more sexist. I mean, I'm older, a lot older than a lot of you guys, but I mean, think about, oh, your mother would say, oh my gosh, I can't believe she went into that interview with her hair looking like that. I'm like, word, I mean, that could be going through somebody's mind. So I think what I'm saying to you, Emma, is that I am acknowledging, so that you don't feel like you're crazy, that it's a tough needle to thread. You need to push yourself, depending on who you are, right? And get a read on that from your friends. Like, am I over the top or am I too shy, right? But you need to push yourself a little bit farther beyond your comfort zone, because truth is, if you worry too much about threading, you'd rather go over a little bit by 5 or 10% than to go under. But I'm just here to acknowledge the challenge of what you're asking about, because the reason it's hard to gauge is that it is hard to gauge.
Thank you.
Oh, great. So we have about a minute left. So any burning questions from any of our audience? I think we can take one last question.
This is my dog over here. Oh, here, I got a Bella hand up.
Okay. Lala, go ahead. Yeah. Unmute yourself.
Hey, Anna. I just want to say it's always an honor to have somebody with insight as to just somebody with your attributes. I'm reading here your book catalog, your awards. It's absolutely an honor to get a chance to ask you this question. My question was.
Calling me. You keep calling me while I'm on the phone.
Hey, I'm sorry, guys. I share a workspace with my roommate. Apologize. Maybe after Thanksgiving, I should fight with him. Dude, just step over. My question was, is there one thing, if you had to just tell us in the audience as students, one skill or just one attribute that you say as a hiring manager and the CEO of your company just always makes a difference when you're observing resumes? And, I like to say it's a little trick, something that you want us to keep in mind while we're going through our junior, senior years of applications and jobs, etc.
Well, I would say the attribute the person needs to have is perseverance. It really, it's tough. You have to be able to pick yourself up and dust yourself off and go on and face rejection, right? You guys are in the mode right now where, I mean, it's a sucky place to be, right? You're putting out resumes, you feel like you're putting your soul out there, and you get rejected. There's going to be a lot of rejection. And I think in terms of resumes, I mean, I think that a lot of it is, honestly, it's out of the hirer's hands, but you do want everything to be easily readable and bullet pointy and correct and all the correct grammar and stuff. But, something that stands out, whether it's in the, I don't know, I actually, believe it or not, it's kind of funny. It's totally out of date. Years ago, I wrote a book on how to write a resume. I don't even know if this is like relevant anymore, right? It's like formatting for printing on paper. But when I interviewed people on what they were looking for, which I don't think changes over time, they wanted, rather than a list of attributes, they wanted to hear how you move the needle. So what I'm saying to you is, like, you do want something exceptional. If you've been, you know, head of a Boy Scout club for, you know, 10 years or something like that, where people would be like, that's kind of cool. I would, you know, something like that stands out. I train giraffes, you know, like these are the kind of things. A lot of times you don't have, so what if you don't have that? What if you don't train giraffes? I found the thing that makes people stand out is just taking that step of saying, not like, I can do Excel and Word and, you know, whatever you do, saying how you changed something. Like, I brought my skills in this to this club or this whatever, and this would be farther down in your career the way it would look, but I improved the company's profits like this. I saved the company money. I changed the company culture as measured by this. People want to see results, not a list of, you know, all of the skills that you have. And that alone tends to make people stand out. Because when you're in a job, what people say is bosses will just constantly go, why are people bringing their problems to me? And people don't mean to do that. They just do it. They're like, well, George over there in accounting isn't doing his job, right? Okay, fine. Okay, you need to be aware of your boss. But what people don't do is bring a recommendation. That's what bosses want. Don't bring me your problems, bring me a recommendation. If we did, I know you're sick of hearing about George in accounting. I think we could shift things up if we did this. That's what a boss wants to hear. And it's the same with your resume. How did you actually move the needle from A to B in whatever it is? And it could be with a Boy Scout troop or your roommate or whatever. You were able to change things for the better. That will set you apart. And you can do that on the resume. You have the job title and then you have, or whatever it is, and then you have, here's what I did. And just keep in that, I changed, and if it's measured, all the better. My Boy Scout troop had 10% more enrollees by the time I left than when I came. That will do it.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Anna. We are over time, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So once again, thank you, Anna, on behalf of all of us here at SUNY Brockport for taking the time to speak with us. To our audience, those of you that are computer science students, I hope you learned some helpful tips from Anna and you're inspired by her journey, and hopefully it'll help you to continue on in our program. Those of you that are not computer science or information systems majors or are thinking about it, there's tremendous potential. As you can see, Anna has been very successful, and she shared a lot of the issues that are happening in the IT industry, but there's this tremendous growth and potential for anyone that wants to join this field. So once again, Anna, thank you. I'd like to request everyone to possibly unmute yourselves, and let's give Anna a warm round of applause for taking the time to meet with us today.
1, 2, 3.
Let's go.